On March 26, 2025, a 19-year-old wild card from the Philippines broke Iga Świątek's serve 8 times in a single match. 8 times. In a stadium that seats 13,000 people, in a quarterfinal of the Miami Open, Alex Eala dismantled the second-ranked player on the planet 6-2, 7-5, and walked off the court looking less like someone who had just pulled off the upset of the year and more like someone who had simply done what she came to do. Swiatek hit 32 unforced errors. Eala hit 12. That ratio is not a fluke. That ratio is a signature. 1 year later, these two women practiced together on the clay courts of the Rafa Nadal Academy in Mallorca, trading forehands like sparring partners who know each other's rhythms a little too well. A few days after that, they shared a court again in Stuttgart, warming up side by side before entering a tournament where Eala would lose in the first round and Swiatek would glide past Laura Siegemund without breaking a sweat. The footage of those practice sessions went viral in the Philippines, where Eala's every move is tracked with a fervor that borders on the devotional. But the footage told a different story than most fans wanted to see. It showed two players operating at genuinely different speeds. Swiatek's ball was heavier. Her movement around the baseline was quicker and more decisive. The gap between them on clay, in controlled conditions with no scoreboard and no pressure, was visible. And that gap is the entire question now as they both head to Madrid for a WTA 1000 where the draw, the surface, and the altitude could conspire to bring them face-to-face for a third time. Their head-to-head stands at 1 apiece. That number alone tells you almost nothing. The context behind it tells you everything. Eala's win in Miami happened on a fast, hard court, in dry conditions, inside a temporary stadium that amplified crowd energy in ways that benefited the underdog. She was ranked 140th in the world. She had received a wild card. She was playing with absolutely nothing to lose and an audience that had never seen a Filipino player on a stage that large. Swiatek, by contrast, was the defending champion carrying the expectation that comes with being seeded second at a tournament she had won before. The conditions favored Eala's game in almost every measurable way. Fast surfaces, compress points. Compressed points reduce the number of rallies that extend past 4 or 5 shots. And when rallies stay short, the player with the better return game and the willingness to step inside the baseline and take the ball early holds an enormous tactical advantage. That player on that night was Eala. She was pounding service returns with her left-handed forehand, redirecting pace with a timing and placement that made Swiatek's serve look like a suggestion rather than a weapon. Swiatek held serve twice in the entire match. Twice. Against a teenager ranked outside the top 100. What made the upset significant was not just the result, but the mechanism. Eala did not win because Swiatek had a bad day, although Swiatek certainly did have a bad day. She won because her specific skill set, an elite return game, an ability to absorb pace and redirect it at sharp angles, lefty spin that pulls right-handers into uncomfortable positions, maps almost perfectly onto Swiatek's specific vulnerabilities. Swiatek's serve has never been a dominant weapon. It is functional, occasionally dangerous, but not the kind of serve that bails her out when the rest of her game is misfiring. When you face a returner as aggressive and as geometrically intelligent as Eala, you need a serve that can buy you free points. Swiatek does not have that serve. And so the return breaks piled up, and the unforced errors mounted, and a match that should have been a routine quarterfinal passage became the biggest upset of the 2025 season. 1 month later, Madrid offered the rematch. Same two players, completely different terms. Eala had received a wild card again, this time on outdoor clay at altitude, against the tournament's defending champion on the surface, where Swiatek had built her entire legend. The first set unfolded in a way that must have terrified Swiatek's camp. Eala won it 6-4, deploying the same aggressive returning and the same refusal to be pushed behind the baseline. Swiatek made 22 unforced errors in that opening set alone, which accounted for 63% of the points Eala won. The ghost of Miami was in the stadium. The pattern was repeating. And then Swiatek did something that champions do and pretenders cannot. She reset. Between the first and second sets, something shifted in her posture, her shot selection, her willingness to extend rallies rather than try to end them. She began to lean on the one asset that the clay surface gave her and that Eala could not neutralize: depth. On a hard court, Eala can take the ball on the rise and flatten out her returns before the ball has time to kick. On clay, and especially on the heavy, high-altitude clay of Madrid's Caja Magica, the ball sits up differently. It takes more topspin. It bounces higher and deeper into the court. And when Swiatek began pushing Eala back, burying forehands into the deep corners with the rotational weight that makes her the most dangerous clay court ball striker in the women's game, the geometry that had served Eala so well in Miami began to collapse. You cannot step inside the baseline when the ball is landing 2 feet behind it with vicious topspin. You cannot redirect pace when the pace itself is pulling you backward. Eala fought, took the second set deep, but Swiatek won it 6-4 and then ran away with the third 6-2. That 3-set loss in Madrid told Eala more about her future than the straight sets win in Miami ever did. It exposed the structural question at the center of her career. Can she compete on clay against the very best, or is her game fundamentally a hard-court proposition? Her left-handed forehand, which is a lethal weapon on fast surfaces where she can take time away from opponents, becomes something closer to average when the ball is bouncing above her shoulder and she has to generate her own pace rather than borrow it. Her serve, already the weakest element of her game by a considerable margin, becomes even more precarious on clay, where the surface absorbs pace and gives opponents extra milliseconds to position themselves. And her return game, while still excellent, loses a fraction of its bite when the server's ball is kicking up off the dirt rather than skidding through at knee height. None of these problems are fatal. All of them are real. And Eala's 2026 clay season so far has done nothing to resolve them definitively in either direction. In Linz, her first clay tournament of the year, she beat Julia. Grab her in the opening round with surprisingly strong serving stats, converting 68% of first serve points and saving 9 of 10 break points. That was encouraging. Then she lost to Jelena Ostapenko in the round of 16, 4-6, 5-7, in a match where the Latvian's power gradually overwhelmed Eala's attempts to redirect and construct. In Stuttgart, she drew Leylah Fernandez in the first round, a fascinating matchup between two left-handers with contrasting games, and lost 1-6, 4-6 in a performance where the opening set was essentially a capitulation. She found rhythm in the second set, competed, nearly dragged it to a decider, but the damage was done. 1 win and 2 losses on clay heading into Madrid is not the record of a player in form. It is the record of a player in transition. Swiatek's trajectory into Madrid carries its own turbulence, though of a different kind. Her 2026 season has been a study in contradictions. She split with coach Wim Fissette in late March after her 73-match opening round winning streak was snapped by Magda Linette at the Miami Open. Linette, a fellow Pole ranked 50th in the world, came back from a set down to win 1-6, 7-5, 6-3 in a match that felt like it cracked something in Swiatek's competitive certainty. Days later, she announced the hiring of Francisco Roig, the former longtime assistant coach of Rafael Nadal. The symbolism was impossible to miss. A 4-time French Open champion, struggling to rediscover her clay court identity, turning to the coaching mind that helped shape the greatest clay court player who ever lived. The two have been training at the Nadal Academy in Manacor. Nadal himself has been on court with them. The intent is unmistakable. Stuttgart provided the first evidence that the Roig effect might be taking hold. Swiatek beat Siegemund 6-2, 6-3 in her clay court opener, moving well, striking the ball cleanly, and showing none of the hesitancy that plagued her early season hard court results. She now faces Mira Andreeva in the quarterfinals, a player who has beaten her twice on hard courts, but has never faced her on clay. That match, which happens today, will be a legitimate test. But Stuttgart is a 500-level event on indoor clay. Madrid is a 1,000-level event on outdoor clay at altitude. The difference in stakes, conditions, and field depth is enormous. The question this channel is interested in is not simply whether Eala can beat Swiatek. She has already proven she can. The question is whether she can do it on clay, at altitude, after 2 early losses have taken some air out of a season that began with genuine top 30 momentum. And the honest answer is that the conditions in Madrid create a genuinely unusual tactical environment that cuts both ways. Madrid sits at an elevation of around 650 meters above sea level. The thinner air reduces drag on the ball, which means serves travel faster, forehands arrive quicker, and the ball bounces lower and skids more than it does at sea-level clay events. This is the one clay court venue in the world where the surface plays somewhat closer to a hard court. The effect is not dramatic enough to erase clay court advantages entirely, but it is significant enough to shift the margins. Swiatek's topspin, which is devastating at Roland Garros where the heavy air allows the ball to dip and kick, loses a fraction of its bite in Madrid's thinner atmosphere. The ball does not jump as high out of the bounce. It does not push opponents back as aggressively. And that fraction matters enormously against a player like Eala, whose entire game is predicated on taking the ball early and compressing time. If Eala's forehand return can stay inside the baseline at Madrid the way it did in Miami rather than being shoved backward the way it was in Madrid 12 months ago, the geometry of the matchup flips. Suddenly Swiatek's serve, which has always been the least imposing element of her game, is once again exposed to the most aggressive returner on tour. Suddenly the rallies shorten, the free points dry up, and Swiatek finds herself in a street fight where her preferred weapons of depth and spin are partially neutralized by physics. But this requires Eala to reach that point in the draw. Her first-round opponent in Madrid is Tatiana Maria, the same player who beat her in Madrid back in 2023 when Eala was still a relative unknown on clay. Maria is 38 years old, a veteran who plays a slice-heavy, junkball style that disrupts rhythm and forces opponents to generate their own pace. On clay, that style is particularly annoying for a player like Eala, who feeds off the pace of others. If Eala can navigate that opening match, the draw opens up, but a potential meeting with Swiatek would likely come in the second or third round depending on how the seedings fall. That means Eala would need to beat Maria and at least one more opponent before she even gets the chance to test her game against Swiatek on clay for the second time. There is something else happening beneath the surface of this rivalry that deserves attention. Eala and Swiatek are not antagonists. They are practice partners. They trained together at the Nadal Academy before Stuttgart. They hit together on the practice courts in Germany, exchanging shots and conversation in full view of the cameras. When Eala was asked about Swiatek in a press conference earlier this year, she spoke with genuine warmth and respect. When Swiatek was asked about Eala, she acknowledged the quality of the Filipina's game without qualification. This is not a rivalry built on hostility. It is a rivalry built on geometric incompatibility. Eala's game does things to Swiatek's game that almost no one else on tour can replicate, not because Eala is better, but because her specific combination of attributes, the left-handed angles, the return aggression, the willingness to take the ball early on both wings, maps onto Swiatek's structural vulnerabilities with eerie precision. That is what makes this potential collision in Madrid so compelling. It is not a David and Goliath story anymore. Eala is ranked 45th in the world. She has beaten Swiatek. She has taken her to 3 sets on clay. She is a known quantity. The element of surprise is gone. What remains is the question of whether the tactical matchup that made Miami possible and Madrid close can produce a result on clay when Swiatek has had time to prepare, has a new coaching team specifically tasked with solving these problems, and is operating on the surface where her historical dominance runs deepest. Eala's 2026 season in numbers paints a portrait of a player who is very good and not yet great. 15 wins, 9 losses. A career-high ranking of 29 reached in March, followed by a slide back to 45 after a brutal stretch that included a double-bagel loss to Machova in Miami and a first-round exit in Stuttgart. Her serve remains the elephant in the room. 61 double faults in 24 matches this season is a number that will haunt her in tight sets against top-tier opposition. Her first serve percentage of 64.5% is serviceable but not commanding. Her return game's won percentage of 36.6%, while strong, represents a dip from her elite 2025 numbers when she ranked 5th on tour in that category. The machine is running, but it is running with a persistent misfire in one cylinder. Swiatek's numbers are their own kind of complicated. 12 wins, 6 losses. A win rate of 67% that would be respectable for almost anyone else on tour, but represents a significant decline for a player who posted 62 victories and 4 consecutive 60-win seasons through 2025. She has not won a title this year. She lost in the Australian Open quarterfinals to Rybakina. She was bounced from Indian Wells. She was humiliated at Miami. The coaching change to Roig is less a tweak than an overhaul, and the clay season is where that overhaul must produce dividends or risk being written off as another false start. What makes Madrid different from every other stop on the calendar for both of these players is that it is the one clay court event where the conditions do not automatically favor the clay court specialist. The altitude creates ambiguity. The faster conditions create openings. The tournament's prestige creates pressure that rewards aggression over caution. If you are Eala and you have spent the last 3 weeks watching your clay results disappoint, Madrid is where you go to reclaim the identity that made you dangerous in the first place. If you are Swiatek and you have spent 2 weeks relearning your game under a new coach, Madrid is where you go to prove the reset is real against a field that includes Sabalenka, Rybakina, Goff, and the one unseeded opponent who has already proven she can take you apart. The last time Eala and Swiatek shared a court competitively, Swiatek needed 3 sets and a complete tactical overhaul between the first and second sets to survive. The last time they shared a practice court, Swiatek looked like the better player by a visible margin. Both of those observations are true simultaneously. Both of them matter. And neither of them tells you what happens when the scoreboard lights up in Madrid's Caja Magica. The altitude thins the air, the clay plays fast, and a 20-year-old from Manila with the best return game of her generation stands 66 feet away from a 6-time Grand Slam champion who is trying to remember who she used to be on dirt. This much is certain. Eala will not sneak up on Swiatek again. The element of shock that existed in Miami is extinct. Swiatek knows what Eala's forehand return can do to her serve. She knows the angles a left-hander can create on the ad court. She has lived through it twice now, once as a victim and once as a survivor. Roig knows it too. You do not hire a coach who spent years building the tactical architecture of Rafael Nadal's game and then fail to prepare for a left-handed baseliner with an elite return game. Whatever adjustments Swiatek brings to a potential meeting in Madrid, they will be specific, deliberate, and informed by 12 months of evidence. But Eala knows something too. She knows that Swiatek's serve does not get better under pressure. She knows that the second set of their Madrid match last year cracked open not because Swiatek found a higher gear, but because Eala allowed herself to be pushed back, to play Swiatek's game instead of her own. She knows that the altitude in Madrid will keep the ball lower, will shorten the rallies, will give her return position viability that she simply does not have at sea-level clay events. And she knows, because she has lived it, that Swiatek can be rattled. That the composure of a 6-time Grand Slam champion is not infinite. That there is a version of Iga Świątek who hits 32 unforced errors and holds serve twice and walks off the court looking like she has seen something she cannot explain. The draw has not been released yet for Madrid. They may land in the same section. They may not. The tournament runs from April 21st through May 3rd, and a great deal can change in the days between now and then. What will not change is the fundamental tension of this rivalry. A player whose greatest weapon targets another player's greatest weakness. A player whose resurgence depends on reclaiming a surface that used to be her personal territory. A young woman from a country with almost no tennis tradition carrying the weight of an entire nation's attention. A former world number 1 carrying the weight of her own declining certainty. If they meet in Madrid, it will not be a coronation for either player. It will be a reckoning. For Eala, it will answer whether her game can function on clay against elite opposition or whether Miami will remain a beautiful anomaly, a hard-court miracle that clay slowly and patiently erases. For Swiatek, it will answer whether Roig and Nadal and Mallorca and all the work of the last 3 weeks have actually changed anything, or whether the matchup nightmare that Eala represents is simply baked into the architecture of her game and cannot be coached away. The numbers say Swiatek should win. The ranking says Swiatek should win. The surface, even at altitude, still favors her game. But the numbers also said she should have won in Miami, and she held serve twice. That memory lives in both of their bodies now. It lives in Swiatek's hesitation on big points against aggressive returners. It lives in Eala's belief that the woman across the net, no matter how many grand slams she has won, is someone she can hurt. Memory is a weapon that does not show up in the statistics. And in Madrid, under the Spanish sun, on clay that plays faster than it has any right to, that weapon could matter more than any forehand, any serve, any coaching change. The clay court season is supposed to be Swiatek's dominion. For 4 years it was. It is not anymore. And the player who did the most to prove it was a left-handed teenager from Manila with no ranking, no seeding, and no fear. She is not a teenager anymore. She is not unranked. But the fear is still absent. And for Iga Świątek, heading into Madrid with a new coach, an imperfect record, and the memory of what happened the last 2 times she faced Alex Eala, that absence of fear in her opponent might be the most dangerous variable of all.